Well, good evening. Test. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Appreciate you coming out to hear me talk today. Yes, I'm dressed as Ken. Why, I don't know. But it sounded right, and it looked right. So funny thing is if I bend down, this whole thing is coming off and shredding into a million pieces because it's so tight. So I'm not going to be doing any bending down or grabbing anything because it wouldn't be good for anybody in the audience at all. And I think there's actually children here too. So I really want to say I'm super humbled to be out here to talk at Wild West Hacking Fest, and I appreciate everybody coming out here to listen. This is a brand new talk and one that is near and dear to my heart. One thing I'm going to do here really quick, though, just before I start, and I'll explain this at the end of the talk, but I'm going to, if I still have internet connections, which I don't, the internet here is amazing in Deadwood, let me tell you. Trying to tether off my iPhone, which has 2 bars. So give me a second while that connects. But one thing I wanted to do today, oh my God. Well, if I don't get to it, I can do it after the talk, which is fine. But one thing I'm going to be doing today is bringing up Derbycon Communities, which I'll talk a little about here in just a few minutes of what that is and what we're trying to accomplish with it. But ultimately, I was going to go live, and I had that prompt up and everything, but it's dying, so I'll do it later. It's fine. What's that? No, I'm good. Thanks, man. So this talk, and first of all, I want to say what John's doing here and everybody here from a community perspective is everything that we wanted to accomplish with Derbycon. So obviously this is our last year for creating Derbycon. We had over 3,000 people, sold out in 12 seconds, and it was our last conference ever, which was an amazing effort. Anybody here go to Derbycon? Oh my God, that's incredible, amazing. So Derbycon Conference basically came over to here, which is exactly what we wanted to happen, and that's an amazing thing because John and the whole team at Black Hills and everybody else has just done an incredible job at building another community event, which is amazing. So I'll talk about the community here in a little bit, but that's not why we're here today. This is actually one of my favorite talks to give, and I've only given it once, and it was yesterday at GERCon. And why this talk is important to me is because I'll say that as we've grown, like if you look at 10 or 15 years ago, and I've been in this industry now for over 20 years, which is insane that I'm getting that old. But in 20 years, you look at 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and it was so easy to break into a company, it was ridiculous. Like you could do whatever you wanted to. You could use 10-year-old exploits. You could do whatever you needed in that organization. You'd always get in. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Good to see you. And you could do whatever you want to get in. That times have changed. It has become substantially harder for offense to gain access into organizations. Substantially harder. Now it's not every organization, but across the board, we are doing better at defense, which is an amazing testament to this industry and to what we're actually accomplishing. And so this talk is talking about how do we morph from an attack perspective of what we see in tools and research and everything else to something where we can evolve into where the adversaries play at, where they typically play at, and baseline actual tradecraft behavior, and I'll talk a little about that. If you're not familiar with myself, and I won't do a long introduction here, but my name is Dave Kennedy. I founded Derbycon. I wrote the book, co-authored the book, Metasploit, the Penetration Tester's Guide, which I just found out sold over 45,000 copies, which is amazing, right? It didn't beat 50 Shades of Grey, not yet, but I'm still working on it. But you know, the first intro there, when you talk about command line injection and hacking into computer systems, I thought that's way better than their intro that they had in 50 Shades of Grey, but I digest. But I've also been on the ISC Square Board of Directors. I testified in front of Congress a number of occasions. I helped with the TV show Mr. Robot, so a lot of the hacking skits that you see out there I've helped with. And I've also been in a Chris Brown rap video, which is really weird, to be honest with you. And so I had a bunch of dancers doing flips behind me as I'm typing on a keyboard, which I didn't think was the coolest thing ever. But apparently it was cool, and it did really well out there. So a little bit of brief introduction myself. And I'm also the founder of Binary Defense and TrustedSec. And so you look at what's happened over the past 10 or 15 years. Red was always winning. There's no question. We'd go in, we'd destroy, we'd use some secret sauce and some magic, and all of a sudden now you'd have a report that had 500 pages of all the stuff that you did wrong. And we got domain admin, we got access to everything that you had out there, and we walked out, we wiped our hands, we're like, we're the coolest people ever. We hacked into this company, destroyed everything. And then we do the same thing again the year after, we do the same thing again year after that, and then year after that, and the year after that. And then things started changing. There's a little bit of a balance in the force. We started looking at defense from a perspective of understanding what attackers do instead of focusing on the specific vulnerabilities itself. I've been preaching this for 19 years, that our focus shouldn't be on missing a patch, but our focus should be how attackers think and baselining that traffic and understanding what attackers do. And we've done that. It doesn't mean that we're perfect. There's a number of ways to get around things that we do. But in most cases, if you look at when we go into organizations, we're getting a little scared as attackers. When we go into a company and maybe our first initial exploit works, we don't know whether or not the next command that we run is going to get picked up by a defender or not. And a good example of this is that we were doing a engagement, a red team engagement, for a really mature security program. And the first time that we ever went after this company, they made us look like a bunch of children. So, everything that we tried completely thwarted, totally detected everything that we were doing every single time. And then we had a conference call with them on the closing brief, which we had nothing on. It's like having a report with no findings sucks, right? And you walk in there, and the whole blue team starts clapping on the phone. Like, yeah, we're awesome. Be trusted SAC or whatever. I'm like, well, that sucks. And so we started planning careless whispers in our Slack channel. We're all crying. We all started drinking bourbon at that point in time. It was a bad night for us. And we vowed that would never happen again. And so the second time around, we were definitely clapping on the phone, which is awesome, right? We raised our bar to where their defense was at, and we did better. The third time around, though, we wanted to do even better. We wanted to go crazy with this, right? So we spent 6 months developing 0 days. We're like, we're going to own these guys so bad that they're not going to see squat. And we had our own command and control infrastructure. We had deserialization techniques that haven't been documented before, complete non-detection from any tool that's out there today. It was amazing. It was like we were simulating a nation state. We're like, this is pretty cool. We're going to destroy them in a good way. And we get on their systems, and we compromise. It took about 6 months of research and development and targeting individuals and going after these people, and we get access to the first machine. Most amazing feeling ever, right? We did it. No detections whatsoever. Everything's going perfect. 7 minutes later, our shell gets cut. 7 minutes. How is that possible? We had everything that was completely undetected in every way, shape, or form. We spent 6 months on this, might I add. So we're all sitting there, again, playing careless whispers, trying to figure out what happened. And what was interesting that they had done is they baselined how we attacked them last time. And they baselined the commands that we executed, and they baselined what they thought was technical traffic. And what they did is they said, okay, we're going to go through every single employee in our organization based on title, and we're going to categorize them in a group called technical or non-technical. And so for web application security, or web app folks, technical, IT folks, technical, things like that. And we happen to compromise a non-technical person. And when we compromised them, the first thing that we did is we didn't drop into a command shell because that would be kind of interesting, but we hooked the API for ipconfig. And we dropped an ipconfig to see what network we were on. And that triggered an alarm saying a non-technical person is issuing a technical command. 6 months worth of weaponization, and something stupid like that gets us caught. We're on our tippy toes now. That is awesome. Don't get me wrong, we still have some pretty awesome tricks up our sleeves, but we are definitely balancing the force when it comes to what we're seeing out there today, and it's pretty incredible to see. So what to expect today for some of our goals is that how defense can really raise the bar when it comes to what we have to do as attackers. And I think what you'll see with this talk is that for companies that are doing a very good job when it comes to security, we have to change the way that we attack organizations. And I'll talk about the next evolution of that. Show it the ease of bypassing current detections. What's interesting to note is that most organizations that focus on technology-based detections, I rarely ever get detected by technology. It's the people that detect me. Let me rephrase that. A piece of technology, regardless of its next gen or AI or ML or UABA or whatever the buzzword is for the year, DLP, SOAR, I don't know, we have a whole bunch of them, right? None of that stuff ever detects me. What detects me is when it gets to the hands of an analyst and they're analyzing what I'm doing, that picks me up. So we'll talk about that. Providing some red teams with some goodies. There's some good examples here of how to tell a story. And you're going to hear this common theme around telling a story. What we're going to be doing here is telling a story around what we're going to tell the analysts of what we're doing. And it works really, really well. And how to best defend against this. So if you look at the industry today, most of this industry is crowdsourced from research. So a new researcher comes out with something new. It then gets added to a tool, and then it gets detected by a tool, And that's kind of the cyclical effect of what we have. Now, we use public data breach information as well. So let's just say Russia hacks into a company and they don't detect it for 6 years, and all of a sudden those techniques now get published. Now we're using those techniques for detection, thinking that we're awesome because we can detect adversaries now. And we have this cyclical effect of public information and crowdsourcing that we use to detect attackers. And we do the same thing in the red team side. We look at what's publicly available. We look at living off the land binaries and scripts. We look at all these different techniques, and we use these methods in our environment to go after organizations every single day. And so our defenses are built off of what we know. Would everybody agree with that? Makes sense, right? You see an attack in the wild, you build a detection off of that attack. The MITRE attack framework, you have a technique, you build a detection off of that, right? You build a technique, you build a detection off of that. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. That's why these simulations make a big difference when it comes to commoditized attacks. But one thing I'll say is that if you take something from a research perspective and you modify and you change it that it's not behaving in the same way it did before, what happens? You circumvent that detection, and you circumvent what the company is looking after. And even if you decide that you want to be detected, because we can be detected intentionally, can we modify it in a way that tells a different story to the analyst that's reviewing it? And so I'm going to show you a quick demonstration here. A long story short, there's what's called living off the land binaries and scripts. If you're not familiar with this, I'll just do a very fast recap of it. For exploitation, what we're trying to do is get code execution onto a system, right? We're trying to get an application to run. We're trying to get code running in memory. We're trying to get something to run in the system that we can do a command and control, where we can move off to other systems in the organization. And so executables have been the traditional way for hacking, which still predominantly work in most companies, which is scary. PowerShell exploitation is another avenue, but we've gotten better at detecting PowerShell. And so now you have a whole other attack avenue where you have legitimate binaries on Windows that are code signed by Windows that have additional functionality in them. So regsvr32, mshta, cbd.exe, csc, mavinject. There's a new one that just came out from Hexacorn the other day. It's obfccconf.exe, where you can do the same functionality as rundll32 and that as well. So there's a number of these living off the land binaries and scripts that are code signed, that are legitimate from Microsoft, that ship with every product, and you have the ability to have certain types of code execution. One of my favorite ones that's mostly abused is, and it gets detected pretty much all the time, is regsvr32, which is under the system32 directory. Why that one's so nefarious is it has a built-in browser, it's proxy aware, and you can download code directly from the internet and have it execute on the computer in the system. Sounds amazing, great functionality to add to every base computer that you have in your organization, right? And so you have these capabilities that an attacker can use, but again, if we just Google what regsvr32 looks like in an environment, we copy and paste that, what should happen? We should get detected. But what happens if we modify and we tell a different story and do something different? And I'll explain that in just a second. So let's go ahead really quick and do an example. So what I want to show you here is we're going to create a scriptlib object. And this scriptlib object is just going to call calc as a proof of concept, okay? So we have a calc.exe that's going to be run. The next command that we're going to run on the system itself, if I can find my mouse pad, there we go, is we're going to run regsvr32 /n/u/i, and then we're going to give it a website to go out and download the code, okay? We're going to go and download that code, and then we're going to call the scriptlib object DLL, which is then going to run our scriptlib object and give us remote code execution onto the system. This is basically copy and pasted from the living off the land binaries and scripts project, and so it's a very commodity attack. So what happens when we run this in something like Windows Defender on a Windows machine? Notice here, we get virus and threat protection detected. It actually detected that attack. So let me get this straight. Instead of removing the malicious functionality in a binary and making that application, i.e. Windows, more secure, you patch job it with a signature to secure that operating system. So again, the functionality is obviously malicious. They don't use going out to a website and downloading scriptlib objects at all. So we're going to write a signature to go and detect it so that nobody can ever do that again. So what's interesting about this is if I decide to change this a little bit and I modify this in some way, shape, or form, what happens? Now, what's interesting is that with Windows, there are a number of different ways to download files directly from the internet. For example, new versions of Windows have curl built into it. Fantastic. Download any file you want to. Did you know if you do excel.exe space http:// the website that you're downloading to / whatever xls blah blah blah.xls, it'll download that file directly to the temp directory for you? So there's a million different ways to download files directly on the internet. and use that. What in the hell is going on over here? Hey, got a unicorn. So in this specific case, we need to download something, and we're going to change it in just a little bit of a way to see if it circumvents Windows Defender. Now look over here. We're going to call bitsadmin, which is a way to go and download files directly from the internet. And we're going to go and download a TXT file from the internet, which is test.txt. And we're going to save it in the temp directory, again, a TXT. And then we're going to go ahead and call registry32 and use the scripted logic again. Now conversely, one thing that you can also do is you can just rename scr obj.dll to blah.dll, and guess what happens? It works. So there's many ways for us to kind of go after this one. Now, let's check this out. What happens when we do this? Let me get my IP address from my Linux box really quick that I have this SCT hosting on. So we have our SCT, and let's see, it's 142. So let me just run this really quick. It's 142. And I'll go ahead and execute this on our Windows machine. Oh, I hate when it does that. Hang on. There we go. I'll go ahead and run this. It's going to download that text file that I'm hosting from my Linux machine, and then it's going to call registry32. And we get calc.exe. Simple way to circumvent basic detections in an environment to get around traditional protection and detection mechanisms. And interesting enough, with registry32, if you're not communicating out with the internet, what's your chances of being detected? Pretty slim. So using specific ways to get around. Now, I'm going to show you an example here that really jacks with defenders here in just a few minutes. But that's just an example of how easy it is and trivial to get around most of the prevention mechanisms inside of Windows. Oh my God, it's doing this. Hang on. There we go. So if you look at commoditized attacks, modifying any existing attack will typically, though, be identified by threat hunters. So a good example of that attack, a lot of defenders will look for bitsadmin going out to the internet. A lot of defenders will look for registry32 going out to the internet. So we have a higher probability of attack when it comes to those. Also, let's take this around what we do for phishing. Everybody familiar with phishing, right? You go out to a company, and if you send 300 emails to a company, what happens? You get detected, right? Because somebody in that 300 population or 500 population is going to get detected. But if I send it to 1 or 2, what happens? Less probability of getting detected, right? So my theory, or my concept here is, why can't we apply the same type of techniques that we apply for social engineering and telling a story? We're telling a story with social engineering, right? We're building a pretext. We're saying, listen, go to this link and you got to register your application for your computer for blah, 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 blah. We come up with a story every single time. We could do the same thing in hacking. And what I'd say that is most companies are playing in commoditized malware. So traditional PowerShell exploitation, if you're looking for invoke expression or encoded command, if you're looking for binaries being dropped, if you're looking for regSVR32 or MSHCA, we're not really playing in an adversary space. And I'm going to show you an example here. If we're using something like this, we should be caught. If we're using something like invoke expression with some obfuscated code, this looks bad, doesn't it? If you're a defender and you saw this in your environment, what would happen? You'd respond to that pretty quickly, right? So here's another example of bypassing easy behavior within Windows Defender. This is a tool called Unicorn. Now, a funny quick story about Unicorn. I wrote it 7 years ago, 7 years. It took 5 years to get detected, okay? And the reason why I started getting detected is because it became very popular in the hacking industry, and people started using it, and bad people started using it, good people started using it, pen testers, et cetera, started using it. And what was interesting is instead of fixing the problem of PowerShell, which you can lock down PowerShell with constrained language mode and a number of other methods, but what they decided to do was write signatures for Unicorn. So what I would do is instead of them fixing the issues, I would write a bypass, which would take me about 20 minutes, and it was a back and forth with Microsoft for about 3 months. And so Microsoft would release, every time I would release a new version of Unicorn, 3 days later there'd be a new signature in Windows Defender. I'd write a new version, 3 days later there'd be a new signature in Defender. So what I ended up doing is I built an application that understands PowerShell syntax and understands Python syntax, and it would rewrite Unicorn automatically for me. So what it would do is every 20 minutes, it would go and download a latest version of Windows Defender signatures, and it would test to see whether or not Unicorn got detected. If it did, it would automatically rewrite unicorn for me so it no longer got detected and then automatically submit a pull request for me. So you're seeing within a 20-minute period of a new signature coming out, there'd be a new bypass for Windows Defender. This went on for about 3 months, and they finally gave up. Hey, it worked, right? Didn't have to do anything. It was like literally automatic. Worked great. And so again, instead of fixing the root cause of why that problem was there in the first place, they focus on easy ways of fixing it. So here's an example here. I'm going to spawn unicorn here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to generate a quick shell. It's going to be an interpreter shell, which should get picked up by pretty much any traditional antivirus out there today. So we'll go ahead and run unicorn. And what I'm going to do once I generate this is that I'm going to edit the file, and I'm going to decode unicorn. So I'm going to decode the actual code that's in there. So you're going to see just the raw code that's about to be executed. It's not going to be encoded, commanded, or not going to be base64 encoded. You're just going to see the raw code that's going to be executed. Then I'm going to put it into the PowerShell interpreter. I'm going to run a listener, and then I'm going to see whether or not it gets detected. So all I'm doing here is decoding the commands. We'll decode it. There's our decoded code. I'm going to copy that and move it over to the PowerShell interpreter over on the right-hand side. And I'm going to go ahead and start a listener over on the left-hand side so that I can catch my shell. Again, commoditized type of attack. Should be picked up by most stuff out there today. By the way, it's cold in here. It's cold. And so notice here, we get this script was detected by Microsoft, by Windows Defender. And so what we're going to do is I'm just going to take the last command, which happens to be invoke expression, which has our code in there that's being executed, and I'm just going to cut that last command out to see what the signature is that it's flagging on. So in this case, we'll see, hey, we're going to remove the invoke expression part, and then we're going to paste it again to see whether or not what happens. So we go ahead and hit play. Notice here it doesn't get detected. So it's a certain syntax in my last command that they wrote a detection off of. So what happens if I just say A equals, and I split the commands up? So I say A equals, and I write the command, and then I say IEX equals A. That can't be that easy. And it is. And we get a shell. Okay? That's the way that we're doing detection today in most cases, right? But again, if the code itself, that PowerShell command that I executed, got to an analyst, what would happen? Would we be detected? Yes. If that code got to an analyst, we would be detected. But if I got around the technology and you're only focusing on the technology, what would happen? Not a thing, right? So analysts become an important part in what we're trying to identify here. So my thing is moving to legitimate behavior, the story that we tell an analyst. So instead of using code that looks like it's obfuscated, code that looks like it's heavily polymorphic, code that changes every single time you use it, it looks completely malicious in every way, why not tell them a different story? Why not use social engineering against analysts that we go after? And I'll give you some really great examples of how you can leverage this. But by creating somewhat of a legitimate story towards an analyst, let me ask a question here. Is anybody here not overworked? Does anybody here feel, are you not overworked? Oh my gosh, I wanted your job. Does anybody here feel like they have enough resources for security? Or funding for security? Does anybody here not have enough time in their day to do everything that they need to accomplish? Everybody. And so you look at that and you say, well, if I'm an analyst looking at an alarm, how much time do I typically spend on that alarm? Anybody know? 30 seconds, 5 minutes maybe, max? And I have to ingest that alarm because I'm getting hundreds of alarms across our environment. 99% of them are false positives. And I have to make a quick determination on whether or not what we're doing is malicious or not, right? We have a very small window to go and do that. So let's take regvr32, as I mentioned before. Let's use regvr32, which is one of the most abused binaries out there today. And can we tell a story to an analyst where if they see regvr32 in the wild, it doesn't trigger an alert in their minds? So let's take an example. Let's use excel.exe to call and download some named report metrics version 2.3.xls. Okay? So Excel downloads an XLS file. That XLS file is not an XLS file, but it's a scripted object that has code in it, that has remote code execution. Excel saves it in a temp directory. The XLS, again, is a scripted object. Wait on the system for some time. Don't use Excel automatically call regvr32. That's probably not going to work well. but give it an hour or two. Give it 20 minutes, give it 30 minutes. Then from there, we rename scripted object to schmgmt.dll, and I'll explain why that's important here in just a second. And we rename company name report metrics version 2.3 XLS to DLL uninstall. And then the command we execute is registr32.dxe/s/u/DLL uninstall schema management.dll. What's the story I'm telling here? What is an analyst going to do if they've never seen this before? What are they going to do? Google. They're going to go to Google and say, is this command legitimate? What happens if I Google this specific story? The first article is TechNet, Docs, Microsoft Docs. And in there, it shows exactly legitimate usage for registr32. So now they're looking at DLL uninstall. They're looking at schema admins for Microsoft as a legitimate function. And look at what's the story we're telling here. Is an analyst going to say this is malicious? No. The story we tell as an attacker can make the whole thing change completely if we're not looking like attackers. So we look at legitimate execution behavior. There's so many examples of these. The noise levels that our systems generate on a day-to-day basis. If we can abuse that, a good example, Chrome updates. Chrome updates in your temp directories has a cr underscore randomized number.exe. People get that all the time, every day. If you make an application that has cr underscore blah, blah, blah in the user profile directories under temp, no one's going to blink an eye over it. Again, ways that we can use legitimate behavior to target an attack. A good starting point, by the way, is if you're going to use Excel macros, which are highly inspected very heavily, why not make a legitimate XLSM that has graphs in it and things like that that looks legitimate, and halfway through the code, you put your malicious code in there? What's going to happen if you have a 7,000 variable macro document that you have that has amazing graphs, it looks amazing, and in there you tuck your bad code? Is an analyst going to see that? No. Another example of fighting noise, Office 365 PowerShell, not signed. Don't know why. If you look at Office 365 PowerShell commands that are being executed and you grab some detections off of there, those things are like 700 pages long of PowerShell. They're actually multi-part PowerShell commands that are being executed in your organization. So you have a 700-page PowerShell command that's being executed in your environment, and guess what happens? You tuck some bad code in the middle of that, again, are you going to be detected? No. Because you have so much information to go through, if it doesn't look obfuscated, you're fine. Many ways that we can go around and mess with people in a number of different ways as an attacker. This will always work. We don't have enough people focused on detection. We will always look at this code and say, hey, it looks legitimate or it doesn't. Or if you baseline an environment of an organization, you go to an organization, the first thing you do when you drop into a shell is you look at what applications they have, and you start emulating those applications, you have a much better success of going undetected in the environment itself. And it can be used for any phase of the attack. Think about it. You can use this for scheduled tasks. Make a scheduled task that's under the program files directory under Office, and make it the exact same name that everybody else sees when new scheduled tasks are created. Again, not going to see anything that's out there at all. The truth of the matter is as hackers, we've gotten lazy over the past 20 years. I remember hacking, and social engineering wasn't ever in scope. Like phishing wasn't ever in scope. And so we had to like legit hack into web applications and figure out like vulnerabilities and exposures on the perimeter and actually penetrate the network, and then from there move to different systems across the network. We didn't have to do that for like a span of like 10 years because the user was such an easy way for us to get access into an environment. But that's changed. Again, we have endpoint detection response tools. We have new ways of getting logs off of endpoints. Endpoints are now a major focus for how we do things. And so today, when we look at it, we've just gotten lazy at hacking. It's not hard. So if you apply the same concepts to social engineering as hacking, you have a much bigger chance of being successful. And one thing I've done over the past year is I've started to do this a lot more. And it takes a lot of time, by the way. It's not easy. You have to think in your head, what's the story I'm going to tell the analyst when I get busted? If he or she sees everything that I'm doing in this environment, and there's something that I execute that looks malicious, what's the story I'm going to tell them so I don't get busted? And it's been insanely effective in how I start to target organizations. Again, it takes me a little bit more time, but I'm not worrying about obfuscation techniques. You know, if I build an application that has a command and control infrastructure that has no obfuscation at all, but it looks like an application, it works so much better. I get 0 detections, nothing. And it works for a longer period of time. These types of attacks will largely defeat software today. And it's really going to come down to an analyst to be able to decide something. I'll talk about this in just a second. What I want to hit on is that a story, writing a book, doesn't happen overnight. You have to focus on understanding what you're going to go after an organization with, build it off of their environment, and then from there start to be a little bit different of what you're dealing with. Is anybody here a defender? Would anybody here detect that Office 365, not the Office 365 attack, the Excel attack in their environment? We had one hand, right? It's a good detection criteria there, or good offensive criteria there. So for defense, what I'm trying to focus on is when you look at how do we look at the future of what's occurring out there today. And a funny story, when I was going after a company, a manufacturing company, I decided to build my pretext off of the company itself. And the company was celebrating 50 years of being in manufacturing. They were so proud of it. It was all over their website. And I decided to go after the corporate communications person, just initially. So I sent an email to the corporate comms person saying, hey, I'm interested about doing a story about you. Can you send me some information about your company and your organization? I'd love to do a huge story. She sends me an email back. And what I did with that specific email is I looked at how the email was formatted. I looked at the fonts they used, the disclaimers, the warning banners, all that other stuff. And then I sent an email to just one person in IT. And I said, hey, because the new iPhone 11 just came out, IT was selected to get the first upgrades from your technology perspective from IT, from the corporate communications person, and here's how you sign up for it. I got that IT person that immediately went to the site, entered in the credentials, got code execution on some systems, and I was like, perfect, that fish worked amazing. One thing I didn't recognize, though, is that that person would forward on to another person, that person would forward on to another person, then I had 300 people registering for iPhones, which got me busted, which really sucked. Right? So that pretext was amazing, but it was so good that I jacked myself when it came to actually going through the pretext stuff. Now, interesting enough, the security team responded to it. They blocked the command and control infrastructure that we had. They reset everybody's passwords, and they blocked the website that we initially used to go and do it. The funny story about it, though, was there was a new junior admin there that was in the IT organization. And the next day, I got an email because they didn't block the email address that it was sent from. And the junior IT admin's like, man, the stupid security people blocked this website. I can't get the iPhone anymore. Is there any way I can still get it? And I'm like, sure, just go over to this new site right here. Everything's fine, right? And I was back in again. Everything was great. And so when we look at that type of defense, understanding what attackers are doing in an environment becomes really, really important. And even though when we go after an organization, maybe we don't detect the initial entry point from a defense perspective. If we have good detections throughout multiple phases of attack, everything from privilege escalation to lateral movement to persistence, everything else, we can do a much better job at hopefully tripping up an attacker through those phases. But again, as an attacker, if I make lateral movement look legitimate, what's going to happen? It's going to be very difficult to detect that. Does anybody here have lateral movement in their environment today? Everybody here does have lateral movement in your environment every day. You have service accounts that log in all the time. You have vulnerability scanners that log in all the time. You have lateral movement occurring on a day-to-day basis. Making that look legitimate isn't that difficult. So from a defense perspective, it's important to understand that trying to prevent code execution as much as possible is important, but it's really difficult to do. I would always say that protection takes a very long time to accomplish. Does everybody agree with that? You can't just implement a sweeping change across your entire enterprise overnight, can you? If you can, that's pretty amazing. But can you implement application control in high integrity mode without any exceptions across your entire fleet tomorrow? No, it's not possible, right? So protection takes us a long time to accomplish, and detection is really where we've been having a lot of our saving graces. We recognize that. 10 years ago, that wasn't the case. We tried to patch everything, which we know that patching is one of those things that still to this day is incredibly difficult to do. Seeing as that 84% of all breaches that occurred came from a CVE that was 6 months or older. And so we know patching is going to be difficult. We know that we're never going to be 100% secure. And so detection really took a lot of that. So looking at the full behavior of something that occurs, the story that's being told, is really, really important. Some basics that work. Prevention, again, takes time. But some things that have a big impact. Let me ask you a question. Does Bob in sales need access to a full-fledged programming language? Like PowerShell? No. Does Mary in marketing? Does Tom in IT? Maybe, right? And so looking at who our users are and how we can restrict things like PowerShell. Disallowing PowerShell for regular users is an amazing thing. Disallowing scripting languages for regular users is an amazing thing. Locking down PowerShell to constrained language mode and moving up from PowerShell version 2, which, my gosh, that came out how many years ago, and we're still using PowerShell version 2? Moving up to PowerShell version 6 or above, being able to do more means a big difference. Also leveraging event log tracing for Windows. Sysmon's a great resource for being able to look for new information. If you're not familiar with Sysmon, it exposes kernel-level event log tracing for Windows. Some great detections you can build off into that, offload them into your environment for detection. Please, please, please enable the Windows firewall as a basic concept. Think about it. You have a workstation that has the Windows firewall, and you have another workstation that has the Windows firewall, and your entire fleet around workstations have their Windows firewall. And what happens? You stop the spread of lateral movement from workstation to workstation traffic. Just basic concepts like that can make a huge difference in impact in an organization. One thing I'll say is that you must, if you're doing detection today, you have to have endpoint logs. You absolutely have to have endpoint logs. There's no if, and, or buts about it. You do not have a monitoring detection program if you're not pulling endpoint logs. And I'm not saying every endpoint log. If you pulled every endpoint log, what would happen? You'd be paying, like, if your company was a $500 billion company, you'd be paying a $500 billion licensing fee to Splunk. So it doesn't work well, right? And I always say, I always make the joke too, that we could solve security today. In fact, I know the solution to security today. I can literally make every organization completely secure right now, and you can walk out of here with this one thing. You can tell your bosses, or if you are the boss, you can implement this. I can make security amazing today, and that is, for everyone, let's just say you have 20,000 employees, right? If you had 20,000 security people dedicated to every single one employee, you could literally sit behind the person and be like, don't click that, right? And what would happen? It'd be incredible, wouldn't it? We would have no security issues. 20,000, so now it's a 40,000 person company. It looks amazing on the books. You have the most advanced security program ever because you have 20,000 cybersecurity people looking behind people's shoulders, and all of a sudden now security's fixed. We don't have that luxury, obviously. So being selective is important. Understanding the type of data that we have is important. Understanding east to west traffic is important. And visibility first. If you don't have visibility, you can't do things like threat hunting. You can't tell this, you can't look at the full story. You have to look at a number of different things when you're actually going and doing it. So all of those things together make it really, really important. And so when we look at what we're at today, I like the whole story element. Let me tell you, I've used this type of technique on the past 10 engagements I've been on, and I've had no detections whatsoever. If I go through and I'm telling a story, I've had no detections whatsoever. So look at what an analyst is going to do. I'm going to run an Excel file. It's not going to be an XLSM. It's not going to have macros in it. It's not going to get picked up by traditional antivirus. I'm going to run things where if they Google, it looks legitimate. Even if they do some more investigation, it looks legitimate. There's so many cases of how you can build these attacks off of that do it. And why I'm talking about this now is that, again, there's a balance in the force, right? Blue team is doing a good job when it comes to defense, but we're only looking for the commodity type attacks. We're not looking for advanced attacks in environments. We're not looking for things that haven't been discovered before. We're not looking for 0 days. We're looking for commodity attacks. And when you look at how we need to elevate our security programs, it has to come with understanding the full story. If we don't have people looking at things and putting together that full story and relying off of technology, we're in a world of hurt. There is not a piece of technology out there today that gives me a problem. The people give me a problem. And I have to go really, really careful on when I'm actually going and doing it. So that's my closing remarks there. I want to thank you. Now, one thing I want to mention before I get out of here is that after this talk, I'm going to be releasing something called Derbycon Communities. And if you're not familiar with what happened at the end of Derbycon this last year, is that I announced that there was going to be a way to build a community off of Derbycon, because we were ending Derbycon. It was our final conference, and people were thinking like, oh, hey, there's still going to be a Derbycon 10, I literally got a tattoo that says Derbycon, 2011 to 2019, that's it. So there's, I got a tattoo. There's no more Derbycons. And so it'd be kind of weird if I had to cross one out and put another one on there. But one thing we wanted to do is there's so many people that came up to me throughout the years of Derbycon, and people here today at Wild West Hacking Fest, and said that when we came to Derbycon, when I came to Derbycon, it changed my life. I started off as a person that was new in security, and I was speaking. And then I got to speak at Derbycon when I learned. I found friends that I was able to mentor with. People, talking about people saving their lives and how they were suicidal and other things, and they found community efforts within that. Derbycon made a huge difference in a lot of people. And so what we're doing today with Derbycon Communities, and to explain it, is that there are 4 criteria of Derbycon, or 4 things that are happening with Derbycon. There's chapters, the ability now to create Derbycon chapters in your local environments. There's established, which there are already let's just say there's already a conference this community is amazing. There's amazing people doing amazing things all the time. Let's just say there's already a community that's doing some amazing things. You can join the Derbycon network. So if you're a DC group or a B-Sides, you can join the Derbycon network, and I'll explain why that's important here in just a second. So if you already have a group and you want to join the Derbycon network and more of that family, organization, and community that's going on, you can join that network. We also have the ability to start your own conference. So you can do a Derbycon conference in your local environment as well. And then there's also a kids chapter and kids conferences dedicated to teaching kind of the next generation of kids out there. Now, why that's important is we have 163 sponsors that have agreed to help out with this. And when we talk about sponsors, our whole goal with the Derbycon network is to be able to provide any type of assistance that you need for your conferences to help them grow. So we'll get you in contact with sponsors. We'll get you in contact with speakers. We'll get you in contact with other communities that are doing amazing things like Wild West Hacking Fest to be able to help you out in different areas. And so basically it's a community of conferences, chapters, and everything else working together for a community to help each other out in any way, shape, or form. And so there's 3 principles to Derbycon Communities. There's positivity and inclusiveness, knowledge sharing, and charity. So if any of those conferences meet those specific criteria, you can be part of Derbycon Communities and be a part of it. And we already have, we haven't even released the site yet, and we already have 37 people wanting to create different locations for Derbycon Communities, which is absolutely incredible. So after this talk, the website will go live. I was going to do it at the beginning of the talk and then release it, but I don't have any cell reception apparently. And so after that, the community will go live. And then from there, if you want to start a chapter, you want to help out in any way, shape, or form, this place is really for you. The community is really for you. So with that, I really appreciate your time today. Thank you very much. And it's an amazing thing. Let's give a round of applause for Wild West Hacking Fest. It's an incredible journey here.